She stood at the airport gate, ticket in hand, heart steady but eyes uncertain. To everyone else, it was just another flight. But for her, it was supposed to be a fresh start, until a single sentence stopped her cold: remove your hijab, or you don't fly. The room went quiet. The stares, the whispers, the security officer's firm tone, all pressing in on one woman who had done nothing wrong. Cameras started recording, people looked away, and in that moment, she realized this wasn't just about her. It was about every woman who'd ever been told to hide who she was to make others comfortable. No one expected what she did next. No one was ready for how it would change the entire airport and start a conversation the world couldn't ignore. This isn't just a story about discrimination. It's about courage, dignity, and a single act that turned humiliation into history. What really happened that day? Stay with me. Amina Hassan had always believed airports were places of possibility, gateways to new beginnings. At 32, she had built a quiet, steady life. A successful project manager, a daughter who called her mother every morning, a woman who carried her faith like a second skin. Her hijab wasn't a symbol of defiance, it was a part of her identity, soft fabric, firm belief. That morning began like any other. She checked her documents twice, packed her prayer mat neatly in her carry-on, and left early for her flight to San Francisco, a trip she'd been planning for months. It was supposed to be a turning point in her career, a new role waiting on the other side of that flight. The terminal buzzed with travelers, laughter, coffee cups clinking, and children tugging at parents' sleeves. Everything felt normal. Yet beneath that calm, something hung in the air. A sense that not everyone walking through those gates would be treated the same. Amina noticed it first in the glances. The subtle way a few eyes lingered too long. The way a man in uniform watched her instead of the boarding line. She brushed it off, like she always did. Years of experience had taught her to keep her head high, her steps even. But as she approached the security checkpoint, a flicker of unease grew stronger. The line moved slowly, officers whispering, one of them pointing discreetly in her direction. She told herself it was nothing. Just nerves. Just travel stress. She didn't know that what waited beyond that scanner wasn't routine. It was the beginning of something that would test her patience, her faith, and her strength in ways she never imagined. And by the time her boarding group was called, Amina's quiet morning would become a headline the world couldn't stop talking about. The security line crept forward. Amina placed her bag on the conveyor, removed her shoes, and smiled politely at the officer ahead. It was a routine she knew well. But when the scanner beeped softly and the officer's expression stiffened, something shifted. He called over another guard, a tall man with a clipped voice and cold eyes. They whispered to each other, glancing at her, and then one said, "Step aside." Passengers looked on. Amina's pulse quickened, but she complied. She'd done this before: random checks, extra screening, polite apologies that never quite felt sincere. But this time, the tone was different. The questions came sharper, faster. "What's under your scarf? Can you remove it for inspection?" Her voice trembled as she said no, not out of fear, but conviction. It wasn't just a scarf. It was part of her faith, her dignity, and her comfort. She offered alternatives, a private room and a female officer. But her words seemed to disappear into thin air. The taller officer crossed his arms. "You remove it here, or you don't fly." The words hit like a slap. The crowd around her went still. Some passengers stared with curiosity, others with quiet sympathy, and a few recorded discreetly on their phones. Amina felt the heat of 100 eyes, the burn of humiliation crawling up her neck. She tried reasoning, explaining that federal law allowed private screenings for religious head coverings. But logic didn't matter. To them, she was a problem to control, not a person to respect. Minutes dragged. The flight announcement echoed overhead. Families boarded, travelers rushed past, and Amina stood frozen in a standoff she never asked for. Her heart pounded, torn between two impossible choices: surrender her dignity or lose her flight. A female officer approached, her face softer but hesitant. "It'll only take a second," she said quietly, almost apologetically. But Amina saw the fear in her eyes, fear of disobeying orders. That's when Amina took a breath, lifted her chin, and said, "Then I'm not boarding." Gasps rippled through the line. Someone murmured, "Good for her." Another voice, sharp and dismissive, said, "She's holding everyone up." The tall officer stepped closer, lowering his voice but raising his threat. "If you don't cooperate, we'll have to escort you out." Her hands shook. For the first time, she felt tears sting her eyes, not from weakness, but from exhaustion. Years of staying calm. Years of swallowing pain. Now, all of it is condensed into this single moment of defiance. And then, something unexpected happened. A man in a business suit behind her spoke up. "You can't do that," he said loudly. "That's against the law." Another passenger pulled out his phone and began recording. A mother whispered, "She's right to say no." The tension thickened. The officers looked uneasy now, aware of the cameras, the murmurs, and the shift in the crowd. Amina stood tall, surrounded by strangers who refused to look away. One of the officers radioed for a supervisor. A crowd had gathered. People were no longer just watching, they were choosing sides. The air buzzed with anger, confusion, and something else Amina hadn't felt in a long time: support. But as the supervisor arrived, wearing an expression of controlled authority, the crowd went silent again. He looked directly at Amina, then at the phones pointed toward him. He said, his voice steady but cold, "If you want to fly today, you'll follow our rules." The entire terminal seemed to hold its breath. Cameras rolled. The loudspeaker announced final boarding for her flight. Amina looked at the gate, then back at the officer. Her next move would decide everything, not just for her, but for everyone watching. She took a step forward. And the entire airport leaned in. The supervisor's voice echoed through the terminal, sharp and final. "Last call for Flight 274. The words felt like a countdown, not to a departure, but to a decision that could define Amina's life. Around her, tension pulsed like static. Cameras were raised. Passengers whispered. The officer's stance hardened, his hand resting on his belt as if power alone could settle this. Amina's chest tightened. She wasn't afraid of missing her flight anymore, she was afraid of being broken in front of everyone. Then, something inside her shifted. A quiet strength rose from a place deeper than fear. She turned toward the crowd, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. "This isn't about security," she said. "It's about respect." The officer stepped forward, his jaw tight. "You're disrupting operations." Her hands shook, but she didn't move. "No," she whispered, "you are." The room fell silent. Even the hum of rolling suitcases stopped. The supervisor gestured to two more guards. "Escort her out." They reached for her arm, and the crowd erupted. "Don't touch her," someone shouted. "Let her fly." Another cried out. Phones flashed, voices rose, and within seconds the quiet standoff turned into a wave of outrage. Dozens of passengers surrounded her, blocking the guard's path. Some stood shoulder to shoulder, others simply refused to move. A young woman stepped beside Amina, then another, and another, until the line of support stretched across the terminal. The officers froze. The supervisor barked orders, but no one moved. Even the airline staff hesitated, torn between authority and conscience. Amina stood in the center of it all, the world spinning around her. Her heart pounded, but her face was calm, the kind of calm that comes when you finally stop being afraid. A news crew from another gate ran over, cameras rolling. A reporter's voice cut through the noise. Can you tell us what happened?" Amina's eyes welled, but her voice was firm. "They asked me to choose between my faith and my freedom to travel. And I chose neither. I chose to stand." Cheers broke out. Applause rippled through the crowd, echoing across the terminal. The officers stepped back, realizing the tide had turned. The supervisor muttered into his radio, his authority unraveling in real time. And then came the moment no one expected. The captain of her flight appeared. A tall, composed man in uniform, his pilot wings glinting under the harsh lights. He walked straight to Amina, looked at the officers, and said quietly, "If she's not boarding, neither am I." The crowd gasped. He turned toward the passengers. "We either fly together, or we don't fly at all." For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Then the terminal erupted, cheers, clapping, and shouts of support. Amina felt tears spill down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from something she hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. She wasn't alone anymore. But what happened next would shake the entire airline industry, and prove that one act of courage can make even the biggest systems bend. In the hours that followed, the video spread like wildfire. What began as a confrontation at a single security checkpoint became a national story by nightfall. Millions watched as a black Muslim woman stood alone at an airport, refusing to compromise her faith for the comfort of others, and turned an ordinary travel day into a movement. The airline issued a statement, calling it a misunderstanding. The officers were placed on leave. Policies were reviewed. But for Amina, the change ran deeper than press releases or corporate apologies. It was the moment she realized her quiet strength had become a voice for thousands who had stayed silent for too long. She didn't seek fame. She never wanted headlines. All she wanted was respect, the simple dignity of being treated like everyone else. But as messages poured in from women around the world, she understood the weight of what had happened. Teachers, nurses, students, mothers, all sharing the same story in different words: "This happened to me too." Amina's face became a symbol of something larger than one person's courage. News anchors debated it. Lawmakers discussed it. But for those who lived it every day, who were stared at, searched, and shamed for how they looked, this wasn't politics. It was life. Weeks later, she finally boarded another flight. Same gate, same airline. This time, no one stopped her. The staff greeted her respectfully. Some even recognized her. But as she walked down that jet bridge, she felt both pride and sadness, pride in what had changed and sadness in knowing how much still hadn't. She looked out the window as the plane took off, the city shrinking beneath her. Somewhere down there were countless others still fighting to be seen, to be respected, and to be free. Amina didn't win a battle that day, she started one. A quiet, powerful reminder that dignity isn't negotiable, and silence is never the answer. Because racism doesn't always come with shouting or slurs. Sometimes it comes dressed in uniforms, hidden behind rules, pretending to be procedure. But courage, real courage, is standing firm when the world tells you to bow. So the next time someone's dignity is challenged in front of you, what will you do? Will you look away? Or will you stand beside them,